So, hopefully you're here for measuring your impact session. We're going to be doing another session, which is about writing for impact. I like talking about impact quite a lot. So this one is about looking at measuring your impact, and we'll be using, some of this language and some of the things we talk about today in that session as well. Um, a little bit about me for those who weren't here last time. I'm a fundraiser. I focus on helping people increase income from grants, trusts, and foundations. And sometimes that's about diversifying as well, looking at new income streams. We talked a bit last time about all the different types of income streams you might be looking at. Always talk about relationships. Last session was a lot about that. Fundraising is about human beings, and sometimes we forget when we do trust fundraising that we need to think about relationships with people. And my main focus is arts and cultural organisations and those based in Sussex, where I am. Here are some of the people that I've been working with over the last year or so. You might know some of these. Obviously, FFT, you have somebody here from there, but it's a really broad spectrum. Some really tiny organisations, some quite large organisations, and I'm also a trustee. So those of you who are here with, kind of trustee or board type hat on, I do understand what it's like with that role as a kind of key volunteer as well. Today's session is about impact, but I always start talking about you. And actually, quite a lot of this work does impact you in different ways. And so I always start by talking about kind of mental health and whether you're getting the support that you need. With trust fundraising, you put out a lot of bids, you get a lot of no's. It used to be for every kind of 10 bids you put out, you get one yes and 9 no's. And so, you needed to be writing a lot of applications, but people are saying that number is now dropped to 1 in 25. So 24 no's some people are getting for every yes. And that can really impact you. And it's not that they don't care about your work. It's not that your work isn't fundable and amazing. It's just there's so much competition. So it's just thinking about how you do this kind of work. If you're not okay, if you're feeling completely frazzled, it's really hard to do this work and kind of think about some of these things and measuring things and all the rest of it. Obviously, it's always been important, but kind of post-COVID, post-cost of living crisis, the world is quite different. We really need to be taking care of ourselves to think about how best to do this work. Stress bucket is one that I quite like. This is Mental Health UK one. There's others, but it's just that idea of all of those challenges kind of filling your bucket. And actually, in this scenario, the holes are useful because that's what relieves that build up. So, what are you doing to kind of just help yourself take a break, get your head back in it? Is it just stepping away from the screen? Is it going to chat to people? For me, it's actually sometimes just about having a walk, just getting away from it and just giving my brain a bit of kind of downtime, because some of this stuff, can impact your own mental health. I know some of you are doing work on projects that's helping other people and their mental health, but if yours isn't okay, it makes some of this work quite tough. So in this session, I'm going to start by saying, well, why are we talking about impact at all? I'm going to talk in some detail about outcomes, and I've got this lovely analogy around outcomes being a piece of cake. Somebody's done the work for us to make that super simple, because what happens is people get really muddled between outcomes, inputs, outputs. And so I'm going to just help kind of hopefully demystify that a little bit using cake as an analogy. And then we'll look at different things around what are inputs, how you might write your outcomes and come up with the ones that are key for your organization, what the different evaluation systems and kind of frameworks you might need for that. I'm going to just touch upon theory of change because it's a beautiful way of kind of fully representing you and your organization. And then at the end, just thinking, well, once you've collected all this kind of impact stuff, what are you actually going to do with it? What are you going to use that data for? So we're talking about impact because it's about telling stories. It's about telling the story of your work. And it's about moving the storytelling from a kind of anecdotal piece into an evidence-based piece. So, for example, saying our workshops are popular, well, that sounds great, but if you said 97% of people who come to our workshops would recommend them, you're showing in both cases that they're popular, but with the data, you're showing that you have real evidence of what you're doing. And it just shows the funder that you're measuring the impact, you know what it is, and that people want to be part of what you're doing. And those who are supporting your work, funders, donors, whoever it is, all those different types of people we talked about last time, they really want to know how their support's going to help and what it's actually going to do. So if they're saying to you, so if you're able to say, 97% of people in the example I just gave, funders will be like, oh, I can see this really has impact. And if I give you the £5,000, £1,000, whatever it is that you're asking for, that will have an impact. Many funders have evaluation, monitoring, reporting type things that you just need to be able to do. So sometimes you need to be able to talk about impact because actually funders are asking you to do that. It also shows the, like, change that you want to make happen in the world, and we'll come back to that a bit more when we talk about what an outcome is and what a theory of change is. And it underpins a lot of this stuff, underpins your case for support. And we're going to be going through that in more detail next time, like how you write about your work. But having some of this impact measurement stuff and data stuff will just make a whole load of other things easier. So I have a case for support canvas, which I'm going to be going through in way more detail next time. But what you'll see here is quite a big chunk of the case for support that you need to be talking about is about this impact stuff. Inputs, activities, outcomes, outputs, and what's the evaluation. We're going to go through some of those in a bit more detail. But just so you know how kind of this session ties together with the next one, like this work is kind of underpinning what we'll talk about in terms of how you write about your impact. First, you've got to measure it. So what are outcomes? So outcomes are a piece of cake. I told you I was going to use cake as an analogy. So funders want to understand your impact. They want to understand the change that happens in the world because of what you do. People get really muddled between these four different things. And that's why I really like this analogy, because every time I'm like, is that an outcome? Is it an outcome? Or is it an output? I come back to this. So in this example, and I put the link to the original blog there, inputs are the things you need to make your cake. So ingredients, utensils, and in this example, it's money, staff, resources, etc. The activities is making the cake, it's measuring, mixing, reading the recipe, putting it in the oven, etc. And in this example, it's delivering the counselling sessions. The output is the cake. And there's cake for 10 people. So outputs very often have a number associated to them because it's related to what happens after that bit of activity or as part of that activity. So here in this example, it's 10 people are getting counselling. And the outcome is the change. What is the change that's happened for the person who's part of that? In this cake example, 10 people are full, people feel happier, eating cake always makes me feel happy. So in this example, it increases happiness. Maybe it decreases isolation because I eat cake with friends and family. And in this example, with counselling, it's supporting people to increase their confidence, increase happiness, reduce negative mental health impact, etc., etc. So outcomes are about a change. Outputs are about the items of things. And if you get muddled, think cake. So just to go through each of them in a little bit more detail. So with inputs, you're thinking about what is it I need to do my work? Like if I'm going to make this happen, what do I need? Sometimes that is budget things. They have like an implication in the budget. Like I'm going to need to book a room, hire somebody to deliver the work. I'm going to need to buy pens or whatever it is that you need to make sure you have to do the work. But sometimes it's kind of resource you might already have. So it might be about using your phone. It might be about equipment that you already have that you need to bring out to do the activity. Sometimes, your inputs aren't necessarily things you pay for. You might be getting them in kind. Somebody might be giving you a space or a venue for free as part of what you're doing. So it's not always things you pay for, but it is the things that often have a kind of monetary value, which includes people and time, and therefore those people people's expertise. And obviously, you're experts in the work that you do. Outputs are like how many things, how many activities, what's been achieved, like what are the numbers of people, things, activities that have taken place. And you're really considering kind of values and volume. So it can be about increasing numbers of things and people, like you're going to have an increased number of activities going on, more workshops happening, that kind of thing, because workshops are measurable as a specific value. Whereas outcomes, as I've said, are a change. That's the word I think about. Every time I think about outcome, it's like, what is a change I expect to see? And they normally have the words at the beginning, things like increase, improve, decrease, or reduce. So outcomes don't always have to be the positive, increased confidence. They can be, which is still a positive, decreased isolation, reduced anxiety. So they can be using what feels like a negative word, decrease, but the outcome is still a positive change. And funders care just as much about what we used to call soft outcomes as they do hard outcomes. I don't really distinguish between the two because it's been proven excuse me, again and again, that what used to be those kind of soft outcomes as they were perceived can lead to really long-term impact. So a lot of funders don't talk about kind of hard and soft outcomes anymore. And I would really, really encourage you to keep them super, super simple. No ands, no commas, no qualifiers. I did some training with somebody, and they had us like basically chanting that. No ands, no commas, no qualifiers. You don't want an outcome that is increased confidence and self-reliance and something else, because the problem with that is there's three different outcomes to measure, and you might get one and not the other. So trying to measure those things becomes really complex, and I'm going to give you a really good kind of example to work through in a minute. So it can be really simple and it's really impactful. If people increase confidence, if they reduce isolation and all of those kind of things, like, you don't need huge statements. So just keep them super simple, because you'll be able to, when we talk about it at the end, really show that impact in a way that people are really going to understand. And just don't have too many. Like, you don't want to be measuring 23 outcomes. 3, 5 is enough. Obviously, your work has way more outcomes than that. I'm not saying you don't have more outcomes, but don't set yourself too hard a task. Most funders on funding applications will ask for 3. Some maybe ask for 5, but think about whether you could come to an outcome model where you're talking to all your funders about the same 3 to 5 outcomes. So you're not measuring too many. Some organizations give themselves a really hard job, because they're like, these 3 outcomes for that funder, different 3 for this one, 3 over there for that one. And so they end up with, different outcomes for every funder. So really think about kind of the big story of your organization and focus your outcomes on that. And obviously you can have an output number assigned to an outcome, like increase this from this to that, but I tend to keep those outcomes slightly separate, but your outcomes and output slightly separate. But you'll see that some funders want to see the output and the outcome kind of connected together. So just because there's a number in it doesn't mean it's not an outcome. Does it have a change? That's the key question with outcomes. So when I'm thinking about what is my outcome, I'm thinking about that word change, but I'm also thinking about gain. Like, what is it people want to gain as taking part in what I do? And what do I want to see the people who take part in my work gain? What do I want to see happen? Increase, decrease. So I'm thinking about knowledge and skills. What developments are they looking at around that? What do I want to achieve? Is it a change in attitude, an improved attitude around things? Or is it a change in behavior, increased knowledge of certain things or confidence around understanding certain things? I've put a link here to NPC theory of change development model, and they go into loads more detail about how to think about outcomes around those kind of 3 areas. So the link will be in the slides for you to follow through. So, as I said, You'll think about increase, decrease, reduce, improve, etc. So here's some examples of some outcomes. I always use increased confidence as one because it's quite an easy one to understand. Reduced isolation, but the other side that could be increased positive relationships. It depends which way round you want to look at it and what you're trying to do. It might be that your piece of work is about a general reduction in isolation, but it might be about certain types of positive relationships. So I work with an organization that it supports care experienced people, so they're focused on positive relationships with the significant adults in their lives, not that kind of general reduced isolation piece. So sometimes it's about the nuance of what you do. You can have, as I said, skills, literacy, maths type things, like improved whatever skills, improved skills in whatever you do. If you're an arts organization or ecology organization, improve skills in any of those areas. It can be about their motivation, like maybe you want to help people increase their self-motivation or decrease their stress. Here's another one. We could have it either way, like decrease stress, decrease anxiety, or increase well-being, whichever way you want to look at it. And it also depends on questions you want to ask and what you want to measure. And this is an example of an outcome that's number related. So increase number of people supported. So you want to increase your impact. Um, some funders would call that an output. Other funders are happy with that as an outcome. So I'm going to work through a model in a minute, but just to talk generally about what you might need to think about within your evaluation system so that you can really measure your impact. First of all, we talked about outcomes, outputs, inputs, and activities. Like, you need to know what those are so they're really clear in your evaluation and just generally delivering your work. You need some kind of framework that relates those different things to each other. And I'm going to go through that in a bit more detail in a second. You're going to ask people questions, and questionnaires can be done in a real variety of ways. It doesn't have to be millions of questions on an evaluation form. It could be sticker charts. It could be, I've seen amazing ones done where, like a spectrum, and people stick a sticker where they feel they are, on that spectrum, and you see a huge weight of stickers in a certain area. So you can do questionnaires in quite a visual way. You can talk to people, you can consult with them. So you can think about doing interviews, focus groups. You can do kind of debriefs after your activities. It doesn't have to be done anonymously on questionnaires. Like, it can be part of a dialogue, and you can be asking people these things. Gathering data on social media, have you increased, the reach of your work, and more people hearing about you, more people interacting with what you're doing? Theory of change may or may not be included. I'll come back to theory of change. And it's really important the evaluation is understood as a cycle. It's iterative. The point of the evaluation is to improve your next phase of work. It's not that you're doing the evaluation and that gets left over there. It's to help inform what you do next, and where you might improve different things, and where things are working, where things aren't working. And I'm not saying you need to get to the end of the project before making the improvements. If you start a cycle of a project and something isn't working, you don't have to keep going at it just because that's what you said you were going to do to the funder. If something feels like it's not working, you need to make a change, and your evaluation is telling you you need to change it. Funders really understand that, and it's really fine to kind of use the evaluation and that evidence to make changes in your program that you're delivering. So the cycle. Funders are really used to understanding this. So you'll be doing your kind of planning, you start a project, kind of comes in there, delivering the project, doing the evaluation and reflecting, but that feeds back into the planning. So if some point in the evaluation, actually, you need to change what you're doing, it's not a line, it's a circle. Please talk to your funder, like, our evaluation is showing this, and we think this would be a better piece of work. Can we change the plan? Like, use your evaluation as that evidence to show how your work needs to evolve. So evaluation framework. So I'm going to go through an example in a second, but this is so that you can plan for what your outcomes are, how you're going to measure those outcomes, what is the measure of success, like how are you going to know if it's been successful, the work that you're doing. how are you going to collect the data? Like, where is the evidence? So some funders will talk about measures of success. Some will talk about sources of evidence. How are you going to know? Who are you going to ask? How are you going to do that? And who's telling you? Who's telling you that it's working? Funders will often say they want to hear from more than one voice. Like, they don't want to hear, oh, sorry, is that somebody coming in with a question? No? Okay, no worries. We'll come to questions after. So they might want to not just hear from you. They might want to hear from the person taking part. They might want to hear from whoever's facilitating the session, working with young people. They might want to hear from their parent. So thinking about who's giving you their feedback and the different ways in which you might get feedback from different groups of people will be part of your evaluation framework. So let's take always use increased confidence. So, having it on a table like this kind of lays it out for you. So you're thinking about the outcomes. So on this example, the outcomes are increased confidence, reduced isolation, and improved well-being. So that is the outcome I'm aiming for. That's the change I want to see. The measure of success is telling me, well, how do I know if it's been a success or not? Like, how will I know? And who is telling me? Who's giving me that information? So that's the who again. The source of evidence is where am I going to find it? Where am I going to find that indicator or that measure of success? And what methods am I using to source that information? And then kind of at the end, I might be thinking, well, how might that look? What evidence is that going to look like? What's the data? And that can be quantitative, always struggle to say these words, which is the number based one, quantity, and qualitative, which is about people's feedback, narrative. That might be quotes, case studies, and etc. So I always think of quantitative as quantity, sorry, numbers, and qualitative as quality, so evidence from people, like what's the quality of what people are saying. I get those, I do struggle to say them, and I do get them muddled up all the time. So I'm going to go a bit more detail into increased confidence. So, this imagines that you'd have each of these three that I gave in that example. So increased confidence. So how do I know if it's been a success? Well, how I know it's been a success is because people are going to report that they feel more confident. Like, it's a really simple one. Do you feel more confident? Yes, no. Or enjoyment might be evidence of increased confidence. And it might be that the reporting of confidence is coming from people participating. Maybe it's a key worker that they work with, maybe it's a parent, a carrier, or someone in your team. Like, you should be asking your team as well as the participants, have you seen increased confidence in the group of people that we're working with? And again, it might be a level, might be a number. And you might have other evidence of confidence that aren't just people reporting it. So it might be what you see happening. So, measure of success might be people invite their friends, people talk about it on social media, that kind of thing. So, source of increased confidence isn't always these kind of really set form of formal things. So, in terms of source of evidence and where you'll find that information, yes, evaluation forms. And I'm going to go through that in the next slide to just show you how you might take this into a form. And again, you're asking everybody who's around the piece of work you're doing. So getting as many different voices within that as possible. It might be about sessional observation by your team. So it might be that the team who are delivering the project fill in one thing, but it might be that somebody from your team observes a session, or somebody else who's an expert observes the sessions and they give their thoughts and feedback on what they see happening. Anecdotal evidence is totally fine. If you're doing a music project and somebody writes some lyrics or sings some lyrics about something that's going on in their life, and how, maybe they'll be, talking within their work that they're doing with you about how it's increased confidence. It doesn't, what I'm saying is, it doesn't have to be on a formal evaluation form. It could be, this person came to this session and then they had enough confidence to go to this other thing that at the beginning they said they would never do. So sometimes it's just like that kind of anecdotal evidence that you gather, as I say, doesn't have to be all written down on a form. And that quality stuff is also really important. So where people are, you've got a quote from somebody saying, this is amazing, it really helped me increase my confidence. You might have many case studies about the journey that people have been on. And I mentioned focus groups before. It might be that you just get people together at the end of what you're doing and just say, how was it? And have very general conversations, but little bits of that conversation show you in, clear evidence that people have increased their confidence. And what kind of, so in terms of results, what are the kind of things you might be looking at data wise? So it might be X% of participants feel more confident. So you've asked them in a questionnaire, do you feel more confident after taking part of this? Yes. X% of participants will come again. Well, that shows confidence because they've loved it enough to come again, or they've loved it enough to recommend it to somebody, and that kind of thing. And again, as I said before, not just asking one person, like, it doesn't have to be me saying I'm increased confidence. It could be my parents saying, I've seen them increase their confidence. So it can be an observation. And as I said, quotes, case studies, those are all excellent examples of this. And you might have a number data point to show the evidence. So people attending the full course is a really good example that people's confidence has increased enough to see it all through. Maybe previously they didn't go through the whole program that you were doing. Number of people performing, maybe if you're doing an arts program, number of people up on stage at the end. So you can have numbers that show those outcomes as well. But thinking again about it in what you're doing and what makes sense for what you do, just don't overcomplicate it. So a questionnaire example for this kind of confidence, reduce isolation, improve well-being. So back to that beginning when I had those three outcomes, it can be super simple. So the form might say, I feel more confident after workshops. Obviously, the bit in brackets is for our use to make sure we're measuring all the outcomes. You wouldn't have that on there for them. And giving it a 1 to 5. I could contribute my ideas at the workshop. That shows increased confidence. I made friends at the workshop. Please don't underestimate friends and fun. Like these are really, really important things. As I say, used to be thought of as like these soft things, but actually really vital. The number of people who feel isolated right now. Some horrible data came out recently about young people and their isolation and loneliness. This was happening before COVID, but has been amplified by that. So please don't underestimate those kind of things. Making friends, having fun, really important. Making friends shows reducing isolation. Having fun, it shows improved well-being. The workshop helped me feel less worried, improve well-being. And I would recommend this to others. That's kind of general feedback that you might be able to use in other things. And then I quite like asking people for a specific number of things, because if you just say, what have you learned? They might not say very much. But if you're saying, what 3 things have you learned? What 3 things, are you going to take home or do differently or whatever it is, depending on your activity? And then always give them space to just say something else. Might be at that point you get a lovely little quote. And of course, it doesn't have to be on a piece of paper. You could just talk to somebody and say, look, I'm doing this questionnaire. Can you give me a score out of 5 for this, this, and this? Some people have like digital things they can do, like Google Forms and whatnot. So it doesn't always have to be on a piece of paper. I feel more confident after workshop could be stickers on a wall. People, as I said before, just stick a sticker in yes, no, and wherever they are on the spectrum. So, the questionnaire kind of is an example of how it might appear on a form, but, really use them whatever way you want to and whatever way makes most sense to people you work with. It doesn't always have to be done on a piece of paper. It can be a conversation, it can be a sticker chart, it can be a Google form, whatever makes most sense with the people that you're supporting and working with. So within an evaluation framework, just a few things around kind of good practice on this. As I said, with the outcomes, keep them simple, but keep this question simple. Again, you don't want lots of and, because you don't know which of the things they're responding to. And as I've just shown that example, it just doesn't need to be that complicated. What data are you already collecting? Like, don't add loads of new stuff if what you're doing is already brilliant. Maybe you just need to tweak it. So have a look at what you're already doing. And I would say having 2 indicators for each outcome is probably a useful thing to think about, because that way you're able to show 2 ways in which you have observed increased confidence. Combine those quantitative things and qualitative things together, like combine those numbers and the descriptions of what you're doing, ensure you have narrative and numbers in there. Is, as I've said, it's really important that you hear from the people you work with, but how can you hear those different voices and perspectives? How is that coming across in what you're doing? And think about measures of success in the broadest sense. Like, how else might you see increased confidence? Like, the group of people that you work with, the people who are coming along to take part, or the people you want to impact. What's the way you would be like, well, yeah, I know that if they do XYZ, that will show increased confidence. You are the experts. If you tell a funder this is how we need to observe it, they're not experts in what you do. You are. So, really be confident that you know the best way to show whatever the outcome is, for example. So, theory of change, it sounds really odd. What's the theory? What's the change? But it's basically a model. This is the Nesta definition, but it's a diagram. It's a diagram model. It explains how your program impacts beneficiaries. So it is outlining what you do, but ultimately it's about the impact, and it's about the outcomes, and it's about the beneficiaries. So it's coming from their perspective. I think, I will say quite a lot about this in the Writing for Impact. But honestly, funders don't really care about your organization. They care about the people or animals, if you work with animals, that you support. They want to know the impact on beneficiaries. They don't want to know that your organization can continue. They want to know that you can continue to support people or animals, if you want animals. So the theory of change is a way to basically describe the impact of your program from the beneficiary's point of view. And I think that's one of the reasons that I like it so much. It really reminds us to continue to remember about the beneficiaries, and perhaps sometimes we get very focused on our kind of inputs and activities, but actually is way of reminding us to really focus on the outcomes. So it's a diagram, and it explains impact, and it's from their point of view. Those are really key things. You can do a theory of change for your whole organization, but you could also do it for a project or both. Like, you could have a range of theory of changes for different things. I've got a few examples here, so you really understand. So this is Jamie's Farm. You may know them. Their lovely little map shows you their 5 locations, but this visually on, what is a kind of double sheet, I guess, shows you a huge amount of information, but in a way that is quite easy to digest in the kind of chunks in which they've chunked it out. So they show, and we're going to go through the case for support, which is always what's the problem, what's the need, and they've started there, and they've used a kind of grey city indicator of what's going on, where these children are. They've chosen that color scheme quite deliberately. They've talked about their target group, and they've shown them on the bus, and here they're coming to what is their activity, which is the residential. And then they've used these lovely paths to kind of guide you around what they're doing. So their theory of change is that their approach includes farming, family, etc. And they move through what happens at the residential, what that achieve, what that means for young people, which is all about their mission to achieve these outcomes: increased attainment, higher attendance, improved well-being, and fewer exclusions. So they've got 4 outcomes. And then the impact, I don't know if you can read, it's quite small, but it's showing you those outcomes. So young people improve behavior in the months after their visit to Jamie's Farm. So, if a funder says you can upload 1 attachment, or you're sending them a letter and you're just going to include 1 thing, this single sheet tells you a huge amount of information about them, what they do. And in many ways, it kind of gives you a feeling of them and their organization. Here's one for a music organization, Irene Taylor Trust. They do music in prisons. So they're using lots of signs and signifiers around music, the gramophone thing, the gold disc, etc. They're talking about 3 different projects. So they're using a bit of color coding there: music in prisons, sounding out and making tracks. So they do work with NEET, 16 to 25. They have a training program. So they're showing you kind of all their strands of work in one, and how that kind of progresses along in the different outcomes that they achieve. And they really want you to know about that long-term outcome. And then the bottom, you can see some, color coding again to show inputs and outcomes, and underpinning it, all of their values. So, it's quite a different layout to the other one, but it tells you a lot of different things again on a single page. Huge amount of information, easily digestible on a single page. Still quite a lot of words though. This is a really, really simple one. So this M- MAH is the Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz. Super, super simple. Activities, outcomes, impact. Really simply represented. There isn't a whole load of boxes flying around and things pointing at things. I mean, some of the ones I've seen are so complex, but this is to just show you that actually it can be quite simple, and just those little pictures kind of give you a nod in enough, even without reading some of that text. And then they've highlighted the things they want you to think about: strengthening bonds, building bridges, and feeling empowered, so that the community grows stronger and is more connected. So it can be quite a simple thing. Like, they don't have to be really complex. And in fact, I think the simple ones work a little bit better. I have a Pinterest board because I really like a theory of change. The link is there, and there's a whole load of different examples. But I mean, just skimming across this page, you can kind of immediately realize what they are, which one's a music organization, which is an environment organization, which one does golf. Like, it immediately nods to the thing that they do. And as some of the ones here are theory of change models that show you how to build a theory of change. It's really nice different models and exercises about how you might develop your own. But I guess I want to encourage you to think about theory of change because it's a simple way to communicate your purpose and your impact. It's visual, it doesn't need loads of words. It shows your strategy and what you're doing on a page, and it kind of brings it to life, and it shows your personality to some extent. It might help you develop your program because you're just thinking, clearly and simply about outcomes, outputs, activities, inputs, etc., and just not overcomplicating things. You can use it in your external comms. So, social media or around specific campaigns, you can lift little elements. There's one just there from Beltruch, a music therapy organization. If you go and look at their social media, they cut little elements out of that visual representation on that single page, and they're using it in all different parts of their messaging. And of course, it's kind of keeping you on track. The theory of change keeps you on track for your evaluation. You are having so many outcomes and you impact people in so many ways, but it just keeps you focused on those things. And actually, it can also help, I should have said, around program development, because if you're already well known and you're doing brilliant work, you'll have lots of people coming to you saying, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do the other? And you'll feel like you need to do all these projects. But actually, it's a way of checking yourself, like, does this fit with our theory of change? Is this a piece of work that we should be doing now, later? Are we well placed to do this because we're really focused on this change? So within it, you want that ultimate goal. Like, what is the ultimate change you want to see happen? You need your outcomes. Your activities can be listed or represented visually in different ways. Those inputs and those outputs are there. And also, just to mention, you might want to say some assumptions within there. Some people put in the assumption is that this is our mission, this is our goal. But also, your assumption might be, we're not doing this everywhere. We're not a national organisation, we're local. Our assumption is that the group we work with is discriminated against. Our assumption is that people don't have what they need to do, blah. So there may be some things you just need to underline to kind of explain a bit that that's your viewpoint and that's where you're coming from. And some of that can be done visually, and some of that can be done by stating those things. So some of the theory of change examples and exercises that I've got links to at the end talk about what are the assumptions you're making, and you may just want to think about those, or you may want to add them into your theory of change. So final bit of this is to talk about how you can use this stuff, this impact measurement, in what you're doing. So how are you going to use this data and the stories you collect in different ways? So we're going to talk about case for support next time. So you can use it within that kind of solution bit of your case for support, like, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you the right people to do this? Because we already know it works. 97% of people say they want to come back. So you can use it within the evidence you need for your case of support. Your funders you currently have will need evaluation. You can use the data to talk to them. You can use it to amplify your message on social media, whether that's your theory of change and picking out diagrams or just stating 97% of people will come again. Like, if people understand your impact, they'll understand what giving you a donation or giving you a grant will do. You can put it within your kind of annual report or your impact report that you might do at the end of the year. Those of you who are charities will obviously report to Charity Commission. Your annual report with your financials doesn't just have to be a dry finance document. It can tell stories, it can be visual, and you can really talk about the impact of your work. And you might do that on a couple of pages. You might need to go into more detail. And you can use all this stuff to build your theory of change. And some people use it to say, well, the outcomes are, pretty immediate, but some of what we need to be thinking about is that kind of longer term thing. So are we starting to measure things in the longer term? Because we really want to think about the long term benefit for our beneficiaries. So the data and stories might come into how you build that theory of change around, short, medium, and long term. It might help you plan projects, as I said before, allowing that to be a kind of cycle. Like, if people are saying, like, if every, if that box upon what else you want to tell us, everyone's like, we want to learn more about blah, or we wish there was more places to do X, Y, Z, the evaluation might tell you what you need to do next. And it's really useful for business planning. We're not particularly going into planning, writing your business plan or fundraising strategy or any of those kind of things. But actually, really hard data and the stories help you work out what it is you need to plan to do, how you need to change what you do, how you need to keep doing what you're doing, how you need to grow, etc. So it kind of feeds all into that. I've got some links here, and obviously when you get the slides, should be able to click the link and go. NCVO, Think NCP, and Nesta have some lovely step-by-step things for developing evaluation resources and theories of change. The useful thing about a lot of the theory of change links is within them, because they're talking about outcomes or outputs, etc., they tell you how to think about those as well. So even if you don't want a theory of change, worth having a look at some of those links to think about evaluation and measuring those different things, because all the theory of change links talk about those in different ways. I just got a last slide which has just my contact details. So if you want to get in touch, ask any questions, whatnot, you can. I do post stuff on my website. Sometimes I post links to things that I'm thinking about looking at that might be useful, as we all do on social media. So that's my last slide. So I'm going to stop sharing.